Hello, and welcome back to Resilient Walk. If you found your way here today, perhaps you're wrestling with something that feels both familiar and frustrating. Maybe it's that habit you can't seem to break, no matter how many times you promise yourself tomorrow will be different. The evening scroll that steals your sleep. The harsh words that escape before kindness can catch them. The reaching for comfort that never quite comforts. You're not weak. You're not broken. And you're certainly not alone. Before we begin our story together, if this space brings you even a moment of clarity, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video. Consider subscribing to join our gentle community of those walking toward healing. Now, settle in. Let me take you to a small mountain village where an old woodworker named Christopher discovered something that changed not just his craft, but his understanding of how we become who we are. Christopher had worked with wood for 43 years. His hands knew the grain of oak, the resistance of maple, the gentle yield of pine. But lately, something troubled him. His apprentices would come to him, frustrated and bewildered. "Master Christopher," young Ling would say, her voice tight with confusion, "I follow your instructions exactly. I measure twice, I cut carefully, I sand with the grain. But my pieces, they always lean to the left. Every single one. I don't understand why." Christopher would examine her work, beautiful craftsmanship, precise measurements, but indeed, that subtle leftward tilt. "Try again," he would say gently, "but this time, pay attention not just to what you're doing, but to how you approach the wood." Day after day, the same pattern. Not just with Ling, but with all his students. Each had their own invisible tendency. One always carved too deep in certain spots, another's joints were consistently loose on the right side, another's finish work showed the faintest tremor in vertical strokes. They followed the same instructions. They had the same tools. They practiced the same techniques. Yet each carried something unseen that shaped their work in ways they couldn't perceive. Christopher began to notice this pattern everywhere. In the village baker whose loaves consistently rose higher on one side, not because of his oven or his recipe, but because of something in how he kneaded the dough, a rhythm learned from his grandmother decades before. In the weaver whose patterns always shifted subtly toward intricate details when she was worried, echoing the way her mother had worked through anxiety with her needle. These weren't flaws in technique. They were signatures of something deeper, something that lived beneath the surface of conscious effort. The realization struck Christopher during the season's harshest storm. He sat in his workshop, listening to the wind howl through the mountain passes, watching his apprentices struggle with a particularly challenging project, delicate music boxes that required absolute precision. One by one, they came to him with the same defeated expression. "I don't understand what I'm doing wrong," each would say. "I'm following every step perfectly." That's when it hit him like a cold mountain wind. They were trying to override something that was already in motion. They were attempting to control the outcome without understanding the invisible forces that had been shaping their actions since the very first day they picked up a tool. Christopher thought back to his own early days. He remembered his father's workshop, not the lessons he was taught, but the ones he absorbed without knowing. The way his father always paused before making the first cut, running his thumb along the wood's edge. The way he held his breath when concentrating, creating a slight tension in his shoulders that Christopher now recognized in his own work. He remembered being 7 years old, standing on a wooden crate to reach the workbench, mimicking not just his father's movements, but his father's relationship to patience, to precision, to the acceptable margin of error. These weren't techniques passed down through words. They were emotional blueprints, inherited as naturally as breathing. But it went deeper than family patterns. Christopher recalled the day he first felt truly proud of his work, a small carved bird his father had praised. The specific feeling of safety and validation that had washed over him. From that moment, without realizing it, he had been chasing that same feeling through his hands, his tools, his approach to every piece of wood. As the storm raged outside, Christopher finally understood. Every habit, every automatic response, every pattern they couldn't break had an architect. But that architect wasn't their conscious mind making deliberate choices. It was something older, deeper, working from blueprints drawn by early experiences, unspoken emotions, and the quiet programming of what felt safe, familiar, or necessary for survival. The next morning, Christopher gathered his apprentices around a simple oak board. Instead of giving them a project, he asked them to simply hold the wood. Feel its weight. Notice how their hands naturally position themselves. "Before we can change how we work," he said softly, "we must first see the unseen architect at work." He asked Ling to close her eyes and remember the first time she felt proud of something she made with her hands. She smiled, recalling a clay bowl from childhood, imperfect but praised by her grandmother. "Notice," Christopher said, "how your left hand curves protectively around your work, the same way you held that bowl for your grandmother to see." With each student, he traced their patterns back to their source, not to criticize or judge, but to illuminate. The one who carved too deep had learned woodworking during a time of grief, unconsciously trying to leave a permanent mark on something that wouldn't leave him. The loose joints belonged to someone who had grown up in a home where mistakes were costly. His hands had learned to hold back, to not commit fully. Our conscious effort, Christopher explained, is like trying to redirect a river that's already been flowing for years. We can build new channels, but first we must understand where the water wants to go, and why. He taught them the practice he called meeting the architect, pausing before each cut, each stroke, each decision, to notice what was already in motion. What emotion was driving their hands? What old story was being retold through their craft? Not to fight these influences, but to acknowledge them. To say, "I see you, old pattern. I understand why you developed. You kept me safe once, you helped me belong, you were the best solution you knew. But now we have more choices." Christopher realized that lasting change didn't come from forcing new behaviors over old ones. It came from understanding the deeper needs that the old patterns were trying to meet, and then consciously choosing how to meet those needs in ways that serve their present life, not their past survival. Months later, Christopher watched his apprentices work with a quality he had rarely seen, not just skill, but consciousness. They had learned to recognize their unseen architects and work with them rather than against them. Ling's pieces still showed traces of that protective curve, but now it had become an intentional signature of care rather than an unconscious compensation. The student who once carved too deep had learned to channel that need for permanence into intricate, meaningful details rather than destructive force. Christopher kept a small sign above his workshop door that read, "Every pattern serves a purpose. Every habit has an architect." The question is not whether to have patterns, but whether to choose them consciously. He had discovered that the most persistent habits, the ones that resist willpower, that return despite our best intentions, are often the ones serving our deepest needs. The evening phone scroll might be meeting a need for connection or stimulation after a day of isolation. The harsh words might be protecting a heart that learned early to defend before it could be hurt. The reaching for comfort might be soothing a nervous system that never learned it was safe to be still. Christopher's students learned to approach habit change not as a battle between good and bad behaviors, but as a conversation between their conscious intentions and their unconscious wisdom. They learned to ask, "What is this pattern trying to give me? And how can I receive that gift in a way that truly serves me now?" The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was like watching the sunrise, gradual, natural, inevitable once the conditions were right. Their work became not just more skillful, but more authentic, carrying the signature of someone who knew their own hands, their own heart, their own history. Christopher had found the secret that eluded so many. True change comes not from overpowering our patterns, but from understanding them so deeply that we can choose how to honor what they were trying to protect while creating space for who we are becoming. And so Christopher learned that mastery wasn't about eliminating all unconscious influences, but about bringing them into conscious partnership. The unseen architect had been there all along, faithfully following blueprints drawn by a younger self trying to navigate a complex world with limited tools. Perhaps your own habits carry the same hidden wisdom. Perhaps that pattern you've been trying to break is actually trying to protect something precious, a need for safety, for connection, for control in an uncertain world. What if, instead of fighting these patterns, you could meet them with curiosity? What if you could trace them back to their origin story and say, "Thank you for trying to take care of me. Now let's find a way to meet that need that serves who I'm becoming"? The next time you catch yourself in an automatic pattern, reaching for your phone, speaking harshly, avoiding what scares you, try pausing for just a moment. Meet your unseen architect with compassion. Ask what this pattern is trying to give you. Then choose, consciously and kindly know you want to respond. Your habits are not your enemy. They are messages from a younger self who did their best to keep you safe and help you belong. Now you have the wisdom to read those messages and choose how to honor them. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not lacking in willpower. You are simply human, carrying the beautiful, complex blueprint of your own becoming. Thank you for sharing this quiet time with me. If this story brought you any peace, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember to let me know in the comments about that one habit you noticed in yourself. We are all learning together. Until we meet again, be gentle with your patterns, be curious about your choices, and be kind to the architect within. Rest well,